Welcome viewers. On behalf of Iravati Research and Communication Center or IRCC, this is your host Pratim Ranjan Bose. I have with me Mr. Debasish Mallick, former Deputy Managing Director of Export-Import Bank of India. Mr. Mallick is a trained economist and has rich experience in the financial sector. He is also on board of many financial intermediaries in India. Today we will discuss the significance of the proposed India-Middle East-Europe Corridor or IMEC, a transnational rail and shipping route that would originate from India and would reach Europe. India, Saudi Arab, European Union, UAE, France, Germany, Italy, and the US entered a memorandum of understanding in this regard parallel to the G20 summit in Delhi. The final blueprint of IMEC will be available in next 2 months. Mr. Mallick, before we go for getting to IMEC, how do you rate India's success in G20? Just a brief overview.
Okay. Good afternoon and thank you, Mr. Bose, for this wonderful opportunity. And good evening, viewers. This is actually quite an important and significant point of time when we are talking about this. Last week, we just had the success of the G20, first time hosted by India. India, actually, it's a rotational host, so country after country would host it some point of time or another. But India had made it very, very distinct, not only in the nuances and the style in which it delivered the G20 summit, but also in the conclusions and also at where it finally aimed to arrive. It would not be out of place to mention that India has really proven to be the leader of global South, as was being told. And India has been actually bringing the South or the underdeveloped or developing part of the world into focus in this particular G20. The star of that, obviously, is the introduction of African Union. Now, let's come to think of it. A consortium of nations, which initially started with G7, that is the developed countries, subsequently started having invitees, which were developing countries or fast developing countries like China and India. And then you had slowly others getting invited and all. But today what India has done is it has brought the entire G20 to center stage. Now with inclusion of African Union in it, it really brings the underdeveloped world or the developing world with all its aspirations to the center stage so that it could eventually become a real meaningful dialogue between the developed West and the developing nations and perhaps the least developed African continent. So you have a very broad or very huge across the horizon collaboration attempt, and hopefully a success would come in that particular route. And India has actually made it possible. So that is the thing. In that connection, this connectivity program which has been unleashed or which has been announced here, which, as you were saying, Mr. Bose, will be fully known to us in all its details in the next couple of months. Actually, it is a very, very important development because it also brings Africa into the whole thing. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So that's that's interesting because we now have a mini UN in G20. I think 80% of the 80 or more percent of world population is into it. Just at one stroke, you got 1 billion population from Africa as part of G20. So now it's really a representative forum. Having done so, now let us get into this thing. It is not part of G20, but that it is being done on the sidelines of G20, and that it would have, as you said, that it would have its implications on 2 continents immediately, and of course Africa, third continent. So that would make it a truly transnational event, which probably would be taken forward by G20 in the future. So IMEC has, to my mind, IMEC has 3 sides to it. As a logistics project, it is strategic in nature, finding alternate routes for connectivity. So alternate to the existing sea routes, which I mean, so finding alternates to alternate connectivity across two continents and three distinct regions: South Asia, Middle East, and Europe. Having done so, it would help create multiple connectivity options between the participating nations. Moreover, it intends to promote power transmission and pipeline infrastructure for natural gas and green hydrogen. Saudi Arabia and UAE are keen to join hands with India in this regard. On the strategic side, IMEC, when joined with the International North-South Transport Corridor, or INSTC, between India, Iran, and Russia through the Caspian, gives us a huge Y-shaped network that links India with a vast stretch of the world. There is every possibility that this corridor will link, and it has its links clearly through Middle East to the Africa. Essentially, therefore, this is giving us a far more broader connectivity option than was proposed by Belt and Road Initiative of China. The third important aspect of all is, unlike BRI, where China is the central lender, IMEC is a collaborative project, or that is what we understand so far, where everyone would be pooling resources, or the global multilateral development funds will come in. So it is not about any one country giving finance and is keeping mortgage of pieces of another country. So to make it simpler, BRI therefore is a Chinese project, but IMEC is a joint venture. In this perspective, and as a man of finance, so how do you look at it? I mean, if you just tell us the opportunities and the potential problems or anything about it.
Opportunities at the macro level is definitely immense. One point of time, by corridor, what we meant was essentially land corridor, making it possible for trade between two or more than two countries which are connected in the same land mass. Subsequently, we had the concept of multi-modal transportation, which made it possible to bring in the sea route also into it. So you had basically the land route going to the sea route, and from the sea route being able to capture many more countries. Now, this is one time when we have made a very, very conscious attempt. Of course, earlier in TAPME also we had made it, but that was also limited. But here, this is the first time perhaps when we are trying to talk in terms of all sorts of corridors, including pipeline infrastructure across such a vast part of the world. Now, once you have the pipeline infrastructure also in place, you have faster movement of not only goods and services, but also extremely important mineral resources. If we can realize the dreams of green hydrogen as we are expected to, in that case, you will have a total restructuring of the energy landscape of the world, perhaps.
And also the undersea electricity grid.
Undersea electricity, undersea telecommunication, you already have examples of that, but this will be on a wider scale. And also green hydrogen will actually change the energy landscape of the entire world. Now, these are very, very good pluses and very, very promising pluses. And as you rightly said, that it's actually everyone's project. It is not China's project alone. It is not BRI alone, which China dictates terms, but it is everyone's project. Everyone has a stake in it. Everyone actually enjoys the benefit of it. Everyone actually has an interest in ensuring that it is implemented properly and all. So that is an extremely important and good positive aspect of this particular project. Challenges are, on the other hand, pretty immense. Essentially, what we are now moving off is from a bilateral arrangement to a multinational arrangement or a multilateral arrangement. Not only talking in terms of finance, but also talking in terms of implementation. You have to actually join the dots at various parts of the world. You have the physical laws, the land laws, the environmental laws, the social customs, etc., in various parts of the world. In fact, what you have an acceptable proposition in India may not be equally an acceptable proposition in Africa. I'm not going into instances, but I have seen many projects where actually the local issues have resulted in stoppages. We know of the famous problems regarding right of way issues and all that. So all these issues will be faced here. Besides that, when you are talking in terms of financing,
but those issues,
now essentially
could be faced even by the BRI project.
Those issues could be faced by BRI projects also, but actually the way the BRI project was being implemented, one important thing is that the BRI project had at its end or at its beginning finance tied up by China. So the finance was not a problem. It was an issue of actually convincing the other party every time it was being done in a bilateral manner. Actually, if you look at it, really speaking, Mr. Bose, BRI, in my mind, was less ambitious than this. BRI eventually would have covered the full world, but what could have happened? Let's presume that BRI would have been a success. In that case, it would have covered the entire places of the world or the entire world in bits and pieces, incremental things. Today you do something with Bangladesh, tomorrow you do something with Pakistan, third day you do with Italy, fourth day you might be doing with an African country and all. And finally, at one point of time, maybe 25 years later, 30 years later, or I don't know, maybe even 100 years later, you would have a world pooling. But whereas here, actually the grid is very important. Now, where the criticality comes are essentially two aspects in my mind. Okay, one is actually if you cannot complete the full project, you do not get the full benefits. That means you have to have a node and a grassroots level node in Iran. You have a grassroots level node at the same time in Bangladesh. You have to have a grassroots level node in India. You have to have a grassroots level acceptance and node by and also policy clearances in European countries. Now you must appreciate that the standards of delivery and standards set by these various countries are different. So that is a very important point. And true to it, the leaders in the G20 have understood that. And so they are talking in terms of continuous review and continuous monitoring of the this particular ambitious project which they've drawn up. Similarly, so far as the finances is concerned, see here actually it will be very distinct and different from China, that is BRI. Essentially, if you have one lender taking up a project in one particular country has done the homework and have negotiated the terms kindly or non-kindly, beneficially or non-beneficially, that's a different issue. But actually, if it is decided that $100 million has to be pumped in for a project in, let's say, Pakistan or Bangladesh or China or whatever it may be, okay? So that was set. But here, actually, individual projects will have to be due diligence will have to be done for individual projects separately. Now, if the credit, since the credit is not being given to the multinational, but the credit is being given to individual countries who will remain responsible for payment or repayment. So essentially what could happen is that at certain points of time, there could be delay in disbursement of fund because the country taking up that particular project may not be credit-worthy enough, like the East European countries, Central Asian countries, or maybe even certain countries in Asia or Africa may not be considered creditable enough or credit-worthy enough to get the finances required. So that could lead to delay in projects. So essentially what could happen is that at the macro level, you will have to create some sort of a guarantee mechanism or some sort of a pooling mechanism whereby actually the whole thing can be done. So details have to be worked out, and I feel that 2 months or 3 months time, which they have talked about, is essentially to smoothen this rough ends and those uncertain issues or weaker links which are there. But let me assure you, Mr. Bose, that in the history of development, these weaker links have always been there. But taking up a project of this magnanimous scale and trying to implement is what is important. Once you take it, once you start implementing it, I am sure solutions will be found. And with those solutions, we will finally, eventually have a good thing of transcontinental connectivity. Okay. The good thing is that it will be multimodal, and so it will be to that extent easier.
to some extent, I find that they have thought about it already, because if you see, they have avoided the rough edges. Like in INSTC, you had Iran, and Armenia, and all those countries are to be negotiated, right? IRCC is also a collaborative project. It's not kind of a central lending. So that model we have tested that model there. And then here you have good, India, UAE, India, Saudi Arabia. These two relations are going extremely well, right? So, you don't have that, and, you don't have a situation like TAPI pipeline, Turkmenistan, Pakistan pipeline. So where it finally, the political differences between the nations that never allowed it to happen. So I think to some extent, this is my understanding, to some extent they thought that even if some legs started happening, so there, because India-UAE trade, I noticed, has going up like anything post the CCPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, where the final links, it is about getting into Europe, and you are very right there, that where, there will be a new train line has to be built. And I believe, when you are doing this, there can be issues with the politics, local politics, the regime can change, a lot of things can happen. But those risks had always been there, whether it is BRI or whatever development project. The bigger thing is to see is how the G20 works out a modality to fund them. The banks have to come forward to fund them. So we have to see how do they decide the modality. I believe, yes. So let us end it at that note that, we have to wait and see. And of course, we have to be optimistic. And this is how the world progressed more so over the last 2 decades. Thank you very much.
Actually, that is what is very, very important. Yeah, thank you.